Imagine you are standing on the edge of a vast primordial forest 60,000 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of eucalyptus and ancient soil, carrying sounds no human has heard for millennia. The deep bellow of a rhino-sized marsupial, the rustle of leaves from a creature far too large to be a bird. You feel the familiar instincts of a hunter, but here, in this strange new land, that instinct is inverted. You are not the hunter. You are the hunted. Deep in the earth beneath your feet, a monstrous secret lies buried, a creature of mythic proportions whose fossilized remains whisper tales of unimaginable power. Prepare to unearth the truth about the most dangerous predator our species ever faced, and discover how its existence shaped a continent, and perhaps even us. This is the story of a forgotten apex predator, a true titan of the Pleistocene, and its journey begins not in the ancient bush, but in the dusty, gaslit halls of Victorian England. The year is 1859. London is the roaring heart of an empire, a city of iron, coal smoke, and unbridled scientific ambition. At the British Museum, one man stands at the center of the world of natural history. Sir Richard Owen. A brilliant anatomist with a notoriously difficult personality, Owen was a giant in his field, a man who coined the very word dinosaur, and whose to reconstruct entire animals from a single bone was legendary. His desk was a constant recipient of crates from the farthest reaches of the globe, each one a potential puzzle box containing a new piece of Earth's deep history. One day, a particularly unassuming crate arrived from the Darling Downs of Queensland, Australia. Colleagues searching for fossils along the winding banks of the Condomini River had sent it, a collection of bones from the giant marsupials that once dominated the continent. As Owen began the painstaking work of sorting and identifying the contents, he likely felt a familiar rhythm of discovery. A jawbone from a Diprotodon, the skull fragment of a giant kangaroo. But then, something stopped him. Lying amongst the familiar shapes were 3 vertebrae, colossal in size, and fundamentally different from the mammalian bones surrounding them. They were dense, robust, and their structure screamed reptile. But no reptile known to science, living or extinct, could have possessed a spinal column of such immense proportions. Imagine Owen in that moment, the gas lamps hissing softly, the rest of the world fading away. He holds a single vertebra in his hand, feeling its weight, its ancient density. His mind, a vast library of anatomical knowledge, races through the possibilities. Crocodile? No, the morphology is wrong. An unknown species of marine reptile washed inland? Unlikely. The answer, when it came, must have been both thrilling and deeply unsettling. The bones belonged to a lizard. A terrestrial monitor lizard, a goanna, of a size that bordered on the impossible. This was not just a new species. It was a creature that shattered the known rules of what was possible for a land-dwelling reptile in an age supposedly dominated by mammals. Driven by this revelation, Owen set to work. He knew this discovery was monumental and required a name that could convey its epic scale. He turned to ancient Greek, combining Megalania, meaning great roamer, a name that evoked a titanic creature tirelessly patrolling its ancient domain. When he announced his findings, the scientific community was stunned into a mixture of awe and deep skepticism. A lizard longer than a carriage, heavier than a bull? It sounded more like a beast from mythology than a subject of serious biological study. For decades, many considered it an exaggeration, a misinterpretation. Over time, as more fragments were unearthed from the Australian soil, shards of jaw, serrated teeth as long as a finger, thick pieces of skull. The truth of Owen's claim became undeniable. A scientific reckoning eventually took place. Based on finer anatomical details, the creature was officially reclassified into the same genus as modern monitor lizards, becoming Varanus priscus, which translates to ancient monitor. It was a more accurate, if less romantic, name. Yet the original name, Megalania, refused to die. It had already captured the public imagination, perfectly encapsulating the monstrous grandeur of the animal. It was a name fit for a legend, and so the legend it remained. That initial discovery in 1859 did more than just reveal a single spectacular beast. It cracked open a door to a lost world. Before Megalania, prehistoric Australia was known for its strange marsupials, but it was seen as a continent that had missed out on the truly giant land animals of other continents. Owen's giant Roma proved that Australia had its own titans, and that its ecosystem was once far more dangerous and dynamic than anyone had ever imagined. The discovery of these 3 simple bones on a riverbank began a new chapter in paleontology, a detective story that continues to this day, as we piece together the life of the true ruler of this lost continent. But how do you bring a monster back from the dead with only a handful of its remains? The work of a paleontologist is part science, part artistry, a painstaking process of inference and informed imagination. From every ridge on a bone, every muscle scar, every fragment of tooth, a story can be told. By comparing these fragments to the complete skeletons of Megalania's living relatives, a portrait of this prehistoric titan begins to emerge from the stone, and it is a portrait of absolute power. First, let's try to wrap our minds around the sheer scale of the creature. When scientists say Megalania reached lengths of up to 7 meters, or about 23 feet, the number can feel abstract. So picture this. The average modern car is about 4.5 meters long. Megalania was significantly longer. Imagine one lying on the road next to your vehicle, its head near the front bumper, and its tail stretching far past the trunk. Now imagine its weight. Estimates place large individuals at around 600 kilograms, or over 1,300 pounds. That's the weight of a large polar bear or a formidable grizzly, but concentrated into a low-slung reptilian frame, creating an incredible density of muscle and bone. This was a predator that didn't just move through its environment, it imposed itself upon it. If you simply picture a modern Komodo dragon scaled up to these dimensions, you're only halfway there. Nature is the ultimate engineer, and an animal of this immense weight requires a specialized chassis. Modern monitor lizards are often lean, built for agility and speed. Megalania was different. It was a heavyweight brawler. Its body was significantly more massive and robust. To support its colossal torso, its legs were not long and slender, but stocky and pillar-like, positioned slightly more underneath its body than those of its smaller cousins. This provided a lower center of gravity and immense stability. Think less of a sprinter and more of a powerlifter. Every movement was an expression of controlled, deliberate force. This was not a creature that chased its prey over long distances. It was an anchor of flesh and bone, built for explosive, terrifying bursts of power from a stationary position. Moving to the head, you find the epicenter of Megalania's predatory toolkit. The skull wasn't delicate or narrow. It was a thick, reinforced battering ram. The jaws were wide, allowing for a massive gape, and powered by enormous muscles that anchored to the back of its formidable skull. The resulting bite force would have been devastating, capable not just of slicing flesh, but of crushing bone. Imagine the sheer power needed to grapple with a 2-ton Diprotodon. Megalania's jaws were designed to inflict catastrophic damage on the very first strike, to seize and hold animals of incredible size and strength. And then there were the teeth. They were not simple conical spikes designed merely for piercing and gripping like a crocodile's. Each tooth was a curved, blade-like weapon, like a shark's tooth fused to the jawbone. And when you look closer, you find their most terrifying feature. They were finely serrated, like the edge of a steak knife. This meant that when Megalania bit down, its teeth didn't just puncture. They sawed through hide, sinew, and muscle. Every struggle by the prey animal would only make the wounds worse, the serrations tearing tissue with sickening efficiency. The bite of a Megalania was not a clean wound. It was a gaping, traumatic injury designed to cripple and maim from the instant of impact. But the power of this animal wasn't just in its offense. Its defense was built directly into its skin. Like many reptiles, Megalania possessed osteoderms, small, bony plates and nodules embedded within its tough, leathery hide. This created a form of natural chain mail, a flexible but incredibly durable armor. You have to ask, what would a 600-kilogram apex predator need armor for? The answer lies in the violent world it inhabited. This built-in protection would have been crucial during territorial clashes with other Megalania. It would have defended against the desperate kicks of a Prehistoric or the powerful bite of a Thylacoleo. This animal was not just a hunter. It was a walking fortress, a creature engineered for both dishing out and withstanding extreme violence. When you assemble these pieces, you move beyond a simple list of traits and begin to see the living animal. A low-slung, immensely powerful body anchored to the earth on thick, strong legs. A hide of armored leather, a skull built to crush, armed with jaws full of serrated daggers. This was a predator perfected by millions of years of evolution, a living engine of destruction. Yet beyond this brute physical power, Megalania held one more secret, a subtle and insidious weapon that may have been the true key to its dominance. A bite from a 7-meter, 600-kilogram lizard armed with serrated teeth is, by any measure, a catastrophic event. The sheer physical trauma alone would be enough to bring down most animals. But for years, a tantalizing and terrifying debate has swirled among paleontologists, suggesting that the true killing power of Megalania was not just in the force of its jaws, but in a far more subtle and insidious weapon. The evidence, drawn from its modern relatives, points to a chilling conclusion. Megalania may have been venomous. When we think of venom, we often picture the hypodermic needle-like fangs of a rattlesnake or a cobra, injecting a potent neurotoxin in a single lightning-fast strike. But the reptilian world is full of diverse and strange evolutionary pathways, and the venom system of the varanid lizard family, which includes Megalania and the modern Komodo dragon, is a masterpiece of gruesome efficiency. It is not a high-pressure injection system. Instead, these lizards possess venom glands located in their lower jaw. The venom isn't forcibly injected, but passively flows from these glands and pools around the bases of the teeth. Now, remember the description of Megalania's teeth. Not simple spikes, but deeply serrated blades. This feature is not just for tearing flesh, it's a crucial part of the venom delivery. As Megalania would bite down and pull back, the serrations would create deep, open channels in the wound, practically dragging the venom from its mouth and delivering it deep into the victim's tissue. Every struggle, every desperate attempt by the prey to pull away would only serve to massage the venom deeper into its circulatory system. The type of venom proposed for Megalania is a potent hematoxin, one of the most brutal toxins in the natural world. Unlike neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, hematoxins wage war on the blood itself. Specific compounds in the venom would launch a multi-pronged assault on the body's ability to heal. Firstly, it would act as a powerful anticoagulant, systematically destroying the blood's ability to clot. Platelets would be rendered useless. Fibrin, the microscopic mesh that forms a scab, would fail to weave together. A wound that should have sealed in minutes would now be an open faucet, bleeding indefinitely. Simultaneously, other agents in the venom would cause a dramatic drop in blood pressure, sending the animal into a state of shock, weakening its muscles and clouding its senses. To truly understand the horror of this weapon, let's imagine a hunt. A 2-ton Diprotodon is grazing at the edge of a woodland, its immense bulk a fortress against most threats. From the dense undergrowth, the Megalania explodes in a burst of primordial power. It doesn't need to kill the giant marsupial outright. It only needs to land one successful bite. It lunges for a hind leg, its serrated teeth tearing a deep, ragged gash. The Diprotodon, shocked and in pain, bellows and lurches away, its powerful legs carrying it to what it perceives as safety. The Megalania does not give chase. It simply waits, its forked tongue tasting the air, its ancient brain knowing that the hunt is already over. For the Diprotodon, the next few hours are a slow descent into oblivion. The wound continues to seep blood, a steady, unstoppable drain of its life force. Panic gives way to confusion as its blood pressure plummets. Its powerful heart beats faster, trying to circulate a dwindling supply of blood through its massive body. It grows weak, dizzy. It lies down to rest, but the bleeding doesn't stop. It bleeds from the wound, but it also begins bleeding internally, from its gums, from its organs, as the venom works its way through the system. The Megalania, meanwhile, follows at a leisurely pace, a patient shadow tracking its dying victim. By the time it closes in, the once mighty Diprotodon is too weak to fight, too disoriented to flee. It is dying on its feet, a victim not of brute force but of a sophisticated biochemical weapon. This bite and wait strategy is the key to understanding Megalania's dominance. It minimized risk. Engaging in a prolonged wrestling match with a multi-ton animal, even for a 600-kilogram predator, is a dangerous gamble that can result in broken bones or fatal injuries. Venom rendered that risk unnecessary. It was the great equalizer, allowing Megalania to single-handedly prey on the largest and most formidable herbivores of its time. This secret weapon, this silent, creeping death that flowed from its jaws, is what likely elevated it from being just another large predator to the undisputed, terrifying apex of its lost world. To truly appreciate this master predator, you have to understand the arena in which it operated, the world it was so perfectly engineered to dominate. This was the Australia of the Pleistocene epoch, a chapter in Earth's history spanning from roughly 1.5 million to just 50,000 years ago. Forget the sweeping, arid deserts that dominate much of the continent today. This was, for long periods, a different Australia. A land often cooler, wetter, and greener, capable of supporting a menagerie of gigantic animals on a scale that now seems impossible. Megalania's empire was concentrated primarily across the eastern and southern portions of the continent, a domain defined by a rich and varied landscape. It was not a single uniform environment, but a complex mosaic. Imagine flying over this ancient world. You would see vast stretches of open forest, where towering eucalyptus and acacia trees stood far enough apart for sunlight to dapple a grassy floor. These forests would then give way to sprawling grasslands and savannas, golden plains that stretched to the horizon, teeming with herds of giant herbivores. But crucially, these open spaces were punctuated by dense woodlands and thickets of tough, tangled scrub, especially along the winding paths of rivers and creeks. This patchwork of open and closed environments, of light and shadow, was the key to the entire ecosystem. For an ambush hunter like Megalania, this world was a perfectly designed killing field. It did not need endless open plains where it would be easily spotted, nor did it need impenetrable jungle that would restrict the movement of its massive prey. The mosaic landscape offered the best of both worlds. It could retreat into the dense woodlands, its patterned skin providing perfect camouflage among the dappled light and leaf litter, and lie in wait for hours, a patient, living mountain of muscle and scale. From this cover, it could watch the open grasslands and savannas, the natural grazing grounds for the great herds. The edges between these zones, the verges of the forests, the thickets bordering a waterhole, these were the zones of death. They were the places where the paths of the hunter and the hunted were destined to cross. Let's try to step into this lost world for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine the sensory experience. The first thing you might notice is the smell, not of pavement and pollution, but of the sharp, medicinal tang of eucalyptus leaves crushed underfoot, mixed with the scent of dry dust kicked up by a hot breeze, and the rich, loamy smell of damp earth near a billabong. You'd smell the life and the decay that marks a truly wild place. Then you would notice the sounds. This ancient world was not silent. You'd hear a symphony of unfamiliar calls from birds now long extinct. Perhaps the deep, booming cry of a Genyornis, a flightless bird taller than a man, echoing through the trees. In the distance, you might hear and feel a low, continuous rumble, a vibration that travels through the ground and into your bones. It's the sound of a herd of Diprotodon on the move, their immense weight shaking the very earth. The air would be filled with the buzz of insects, the screech of cockatoos, and then a sudden, heart-stopping silence as a twig snaps nearby. A sound that tells every smaller creature in the vicinity to freeze, because the master of this domain is on the move. As the apex predator, Megalania was not an agent of chaos, but a force for stability. It was the great regulator, the keystone in the arch of this entire ecosystem. By preying on the largest and most abundant herbivores, it kept their populations in check, preventing them from overgrazing and stripping the landscape bare. Its very presence would have shaped the behavior of every other animal, dictating where they fed, when they moved, and where they dared not go. It was a terrifying monster, yes, but it was also a vital gardener and architect of its environment, the silent, watchful king of a world teeming with giants. In this mosaic of shadow and light, Megalania perfected a strategy of lethal patience. It was the quintessential ambush predator. You must erase any image of a prolonged, dramatic chase across the savannah, like a lion running down a wildebeest. Such pursuits are incredibly energy-intensive, a strategy better suited to warm-blooded mammals. Megalania operated on a different, more ancient and efficient principle, a calculated economy of motion where hours of stillness are exchanged for a few seconds of overwhelming, decisive violence. The foundation of this strategy was its reptilian metabolism, a marvel of energy conservation. As a cold-blooded or ectothermic creature, Megalania did not need to constantly burn calories to maintain its body temperature. It could survive for weeks, perhaps even months, on a single large meal. This biological reality granted it the ultimate predator's virtue: patience. It could find a strategic location, a dense thicket of ferns overlooking a well-worn game trail, or a cluster of rocks near a life-giving waterhole, and simply wait. For hours, it could remain almost perfectly motionless, its patterned skin blending seamlessly with the leaf litter and dappled sunlight, making it appear as nothing more than a fallen log or a trick of the light. Its breathing would slow to a whisper, its body temperature matching the ambient air. It was a living statue, a patient engine of death in standby mode. While it waited, it would be constantly gathering intelligence about its surroundings, painting a rich picture of the world through senses both familiar and alien. Its eyesight was likely sharp, highly attuned to detecting the slightest movement against a static background. But its most powerful sensory tool was almost certainly its sense of smell, supercharged by the iconic forked tongue. You can imagine the scene: the great, still head, and the slow, deliberate flick of that dark, forked tongue tasting the air. With every flick, it was gathering microscopic scent particles and transferring them to a specialized sensory organ on the roof of its mouth called the Jacobson's organ. This was not just smelling as we know it. This was advanced chemical analysis. It could detect the approach of a herd long before it could see or hear it. It could differentiate between species and perhaps even identify the old, the young, or the sick. It was building a precise, three-dimensional map of scent, waiting for one of those trails to intersect with its kill zone. And then, in a heartbeat, everything changes. A young Diprotodon, momentarily separated from its mother, wanders a few feet too close to the ambush site. For the Megalania, this is the trigger, the precise moment that all the stored energy is unleashed. The attack is not a graceful leap, but a low, earth-shaking surge, an explosion of muscle and bone. In an instant, the 600-kilogram predator launches itself from its cover, the ground trembling under the immense propulsive force of its legs. It would cover the short distance to its prey in a terrifying blur of motion, a reptilian battering ram of unstoppable momentum. Megalania was not a mindless brute. It was a calculating hunter. It knew it could not afford a prolonged struggle. The strike had to be precise and debilitating. It wouldn't lunge for the head or the heavily built shoulders of a giant marsupial. It would aim low. The target was the massive, muscle-bound hind legs, the engine of the animal's escape, or the soft, vulnerable underbelly. The goal was twofold. First, the physical trauma of the bite itself, with those serrated teeth tearing through muscle, would instantly cripple the prey. Second, and most importantly, this was the moment to deliver its secret weapon. The physical attack was over in seconds, but the true weapon had just been deployed. Remember that potent hematoxin we discussed? Its silent, deadly work was just beginning. The prey animal, panicking and grievously wounded, would stumble away, believing it had escaped. The Megalania, its task complete for now, would let it go, conserving its energy and avoiding any risk of a defensive injury. The hunt had entered its second, more insidious phase. So what was this unfortunate creature, stumbling away with venom now coursing through its veins? What kind of animal required such a sophisticated and powerful predator to hunt it? The menu for Megalania was a veritable pantheon of giants, a gallery of the weird and wonderful creatures known collectively as the Australian Megafauna. During the Pleistocene, Australia was a world dominated by marsupials that had evolved to fill ecological niches occupied by placental mammals on other continents. There were no mammoths, but there were Diprotodons. There were no saber-toothed cats, but there was the marsupial lion. And for Megalania, the undisputed king of this realm, the larger the prey, the better. At the very top of its preferred menu was Diprotodon optatum, the largest marsupial that has ever lived. The name is often translated as two forward teeth, referring to its prominent wombat-like incisors. But the comparison to a wombat, while accurate in terms of evolutionary lineage, fails to capture the breathtaking scale of the animal. You must imagine a beast the size of a white rhinoceros, weighing up to an astonishing 2,800 kilograms. That's over 6,000 pounds, Sir Soons. It stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, a lumbering behemoth of muscle and bone. Its body was thick and barrel-chested, supported by 4 pillar-like legs. It was a walking fortress, a slow-moving, placid herbivore that likely traveled in small herds, browsing on the leaves, shoots, and shrubs of the open woodlands. For most other predators, a healthy adult Diprotodon would have been virtually untouchable. Its sheer bulk was its primary defense. But for Megalania, these traits made it the perfect prey. The Diprotodon's immense size meant a single kill could sustain the giant lizard for a very long time. More importantly, its slow, lumbering pace made it fatally vulnerable to the one thing it could not defend against: a perfectly executed ambush. It could not outrun the explosive lunge of a hidden Megalania, and once that single venom-laced bite was delivered to a hind leg, its fate was sealed. The fortress had been breached, and it was only a matter of time before it crumbled. But the giant wombat was not the only titan on the menu. Stalking the same plains was another icon of the megafauna, Procoptodon Goliath, the giant short-faced kangaroo. Try to picture a kangaroo, but scaled up for a nightmare. It stood well over 2 meters, or nearly 7 feet tall, meaning it could look a tall human straight in the eye. Its face was unnervingly different from a modern ruse. Short, flat, and robust, with forward-facing eyes, giving it a more primate-like appearance. Its forelimbs were strangely long, ending in 2 elongated, clawed fingers, which it may have used to grasp and pull high branches down to its mouth. Most striking of all were its feet. Instead of the familiar 3-toed structure, Procoptodon had evolved a single, massive, almost hoof-like toe on each hind foot, an adaptation for efficient, powerful locomotion across the open plains. A kick from this creature would have been an event of bone-shattering violence, a formidable defense against any predator foolish enough to attack it head-on. But again, Megalania's strategy of ambush and venom bypassed these defenses entirely. A surprise attack from the side, targeting those powerful legs, could neutralize the animal's ability to kick or flee, allowing for the delivery of the fatal bite. While these 2 giants were likely its primary targets, Megalania was an opportunist and would not have passed up other meals. The fossil record shows a diverse range of potential prey. Strange, marsupial tapirs, called paleontologist, with small trunks and powerful claws, giant flightless birds like genyornis, whose eggs would have also provided a nutritious snack, and any number of smaller wallabies and kangaroos. But a predator of this magnitude does not live by its own kills alone. Megalania was also almost certainly a dominant scavenger. You can imagine the scene. A smaller predator, perhaps a Thylacoleo, has just brought down a kangaroo. Before it can begin to feed, a shadow falls over it. The Megalania arrives, its immense bulk and intimidating presence a clear and unambiguous signal. The smaller predator, no matter how fierce, would have little choice but to abandon its hard-won meal. In the brutal economy of the Pleistocene, might made right, and Megalania's Thylacoleo gave it the ultimate authority over any carcass in its territory. Once the kill was secured, whether by its own hand or through sheer intimidation, the next phase began: consumption. And for Megalania, this was a process of brutal, unparalleled efficiency. In the unforgiving world of the Pleistocene, energy was the only currency that mattered, and no predator could afford to be a picky eater. Every calorie had to be extracted, every nutrient absorbed. The way Megalania processed a carcass was a testament to this iron law of survival, showcasing an anatomy perfectly evolved to leave nothing behind. Unlike mammalian carnivores that can chew their food, Megalania was, like its modern reptilian relatives, a slice and gulp feeder. Its serrated teeth were brilliant for tearing off massive slabs of flesh, but useless for grinding them down. Instead, it relied on a combination of jaw mechanics, powerful muscles, and sheer force of will. You have to imagine it at a carcass, perhaps a multi-ton Diprotodon. It would drive its head deep into the body cavity, anchor its teeth, and then use its immensely powerful neck and body to rip away chunks of meat weighing dozens of kilograms each. To swallow such a massive mouthful, Megalania would employ a technique you can still see in its smaller cousins today: inertial feeding. Gripping the slab of flesh, hide, and bone in its jaws, it would raise its head, and with a series of violent, upward jerks, it would literally throw the food to the back of its throat. Its skull had a degree of flexibility, a feature known as cranial kinesis, which allowed the bones of the snout and jaw to move independently, helping to maneuver and position the food. Powerful throat muscles would then engage, contracting in waves to force the meal down its gullet and into its expandable stomach. It was a violent, convulsive, and astonishingly effective process. We see a modern, albeit smaller version of this in the Komodo dragon, a lizard famous for its gluttony. A Komodo can famously consume up to 80% of its own body weight in a single feeding, its stomach distending to an incredible degree. It's highly likely that Megalania possessed a similar, if not greater, capacity. A successful hunt meant it could gorge itself, filling its energetic reserves for the long, lean weeks that might follow. This feeding strategy was not just about consuming the prime cuts of meat. That would be wasteful. Megalania was a total consumption machine. Its powerful jaws and serrated teeth could rip through the thickest hide. Its stomach acids were potent enough to dissolve tough sinew, and it could even swallow and digest smaller bones, which were a vital source of calcium and other minerals. This approach meant that after Megalania had finished with a carcass, there was very little left for lesser scavengers. It was the ultimate recycler, ensuring that the energy locked within the body of a giant herbivore was efficiently transferred to the apex predator, rather than slowly decomposing back into the soil. This process also played a vital role in sanitation, removing massive, rotting carcasses that could otherwise spread disease. But its diet wasn't always a grand feast of megafauna. Like all successful predators, Megalania was an opportunist. It would have supplemented these large kills with more easily acquired meals. Using that powerful, chemically attuned sense of smell, it would have been an expert at locating the nests of other animals. You can imagine it plundering the nesting grounds of the giant flightless bird, Genyornis, using its strong claws to tear open the earth and swallow the large, nutrient-rich eggs whole. The nests of crocodiles and other lizards would have been equally tempting targets. For a creature that operated on a grand scale, These small, high-energy snacks were low-risk, high-reward finds that kept the engine running between major kills. This ability to exploit every available food source, from the mightiest Diprotodon to a humble clutch of eggs, was yet another key to its long and successful reign. The rich resources of Pleistocene Australia, however, were not uncontested. Megalania may have been king, but its kingdom was filled with other powerful and ambitious hunters. It did not roam a land of defenseless herbivores. It shared its territory with rivals who were themselves highly evolved and formidable predators. Chief among them, the most powerful mammalian carnivore on the continent, was a creature that has earned the terrifying name, Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. First, let's be clear. Thylacoleo was not a cat. It was not a lion, nor was it even remotely related to the great felines of Africa and Asia. It was something far stranger, a uniquely Australian experiment in carnivorous evolution. Thylacoleo was a member of the Vombatiforms, the same group that includes modern wombats and koalas. Imagine the evolutionary journey required to turn a placid, plant-eating lineage into a bone-crushing super-predator. Weighing up to 160 kilograms, the size of a large jaguar or a lioness, Thylacoleo was a compact, immensely powerful animal, built low to the ground and rippling with muscle. Its killing tools were unlike those of almost any other predator. Instead of canine fangs, its lethality came from a pair of huge, blade-like premolar teeth. These were not for piercing, they were for shearing. They functioned like a pair of massive, flesh-stripping bolt cutters, giving Thylacoleo what is believed to be the most powerful bite, pound for pound, of any mammal that has ever lived. It could crunch through bone and sinew with terrifying ease. To aid in grappling with its prey, the marsupial lion had another trick: a semi-opposable thumb on each of its front paws, armed with a single enormous retractable claw. It could use this grappling hook to seize struggling prey, or perhaps even to climb trees, waiting to drop down on victims from above. This formidable predator stalked the same mosaic forests and woodlands as Megalania, and more importantly, it often hunted the very same prey. A giant kangaroo like Prehistoric, while a challenge, was a perfectly viable target for a Thylacoleo. When you have two elite predators hunting the same animals in the same forests, confrontation is not a possibility. It is an inevitability. The stage was set for a clash between the reptilian titan and the mammalian powerhouse. But what would such a confrontation look like? It's unlikely that these two animals regularly engaged in open, bloody combat. Both were armed with weapons capable of inflicting fatal injuries, and a fight to the death could easily become a suicide mission for both participants, even the winner. A venomous bite from Megalania could be a death sentence for the Thylacoleo, while the marsupial lion's bone-shearing jaws could easily snap one of Megalania's legs, crippling it for life. So instead of a hot war, they likely engaged in a cold war, a high-stakes competition fought with intimidation, scent marking, and avoidance. Imagine the tension of an encounter at a distance. The low, rumbling hiss of the giant lizard, the guttural snarl of the marsupial lion. A moment of mutual respect for each other's power before one decides the risk is too great and fades back into the bush. The most common and direct interaction was probably the one we saw earlier: the theft of kills, a behavior known as kleptoparasitism. Let's paint the scene. The Thylacoleo, using its immense power and stealth, has successfully ambushed and killed a large wallaby. It is a hard-won prize, the reward for a risky and energy-intensive hunt. As it begins to feed, a familiar scent drifts on the wind, and a shadow falls over the kill site. The Megalania approaches. It does not need to charge or make a grand display of aggression. Its sheer size, its silent, alien, reptilian confidence is threat enough. It moves with a slow, deliberate swagger that communicates its absolute dominance. The Thylacoleo, for all its ferocity and power, is now faced with a stark calculation. Does it fight a 600-kilogram venomous monster for this single meal and risk a fatal injury that would mean starvation later? Or does it surrender its prize, retreat into the forest, and live to hunt another day? The answer is brutally simple. In most scenarios, the smaller predator would yield, backing away with a resentful snarl, leaving its dinner to the king. This is the very definition of an apex predator, not just an animal that can kill, but one that stands utterly unopposed at the top of the food chain, the ultimate authority on any kill within its domain. The marsupial lion was a formidable challenger, a creature of warm blood and mammalian cunning. But Megalania also shared its world with another giant killer, a cold-blooded rival that came from a far more ancient and famously powerful lineage: the crocodiles. When you picture a crocodile, you imagine an aquatic ambush predator lurking silently beneath the water's surface, a master of the riverbank and the billabong. You must erase that image entirely. Pleistocene Australia was home to a crocodile that had left the water behind and evolved to become a dedicated, terrifyingly effective predator on dry land. Its name was Quincana. Named after the Quinkins, supernatural spirits from the mythology of the Aboriginal people of Cape York, this was a creature that truly lived up to its mythical moniker. For millions of years, the Quincana lineage terrorized the Australian woodlands. Growing up to 6 meters in length, it was a direct size rival to Megalania, a true heavyweight contender. The most striking thing about it was its posture. Unlike the sprawling side-to-side gait of its water-loving cousins, Quincana's legs were longer and positioned more directly underneath its body. This arrangement allowed for a far more efficient, upright walking and trotting motion, enabling it to move with surprising speed and agility across the forest floor. It didn't just belly crawl, it could stride, and perhaps even gallop in short bursts, pursuing its prey far from the safety of the water's edge. Its weaponry was just as specialized for this terrestrial lifestyle. Modern crocodiles have conical peg-like teeth, perfectly designed for clamping down with immense force and holding on to struggling prey to drag it underwater to drown. Quincana's teeth were fundamentally different. They were part of a terrifying group of predators with so-called zyphodont dentition. Each tooth was flattened from side to side, curved backwards, and lined with fine serrations, like the edge of a saw blade. If that sounds familiar, it's because these are precisely the kind of teeth found in the most famous predator of all time, Tyrannosaurus rex. These were not teeth for gripping and drowning. They were teeth for slicing and dismembering. They were biological knives designed to inflict massive, bleeding wounds on large, land-dwelling animals. So now you have the complete picture. 2 enormous, cold-blooded ambush predators, both armed with serrated, flesh-tearing teeth, stalking the very same woodlands and likely hunting the very same prey. One, a varanid lizard, built low to the ground, relying on stealth and a secret weapon of venom. The other, a crocodilomorph, standing taller, relying on a more active pursuit and the raw, bone-crushing power of its famous jaws. They were, in many ways, reptilian ecological mirrors of one another. And in a world of finite resources, this made direct, violent conflict between them almost certain. The fossil record is silent on whether these two titans ever came to blows. We have found no Quincana skeleton with Megalania bite marks, nor the reverse. But in the brutal calculus of nature, where prime territory, a fresh carcass, or access to a dwindling water source meant the difference between life and death, it is almost impossible that they did not. Imagine the scene, a tense standoff over a freshly killed Diprotodon. The air would be thick with primal menace. A low, guttural hiss from the Megalania, a deep, rumbling growl from the throat of the Quincana. It would be a battle of contrasting styles. The Megalania, with its lower center of gravity, would try to get underneath, to land a venomous bite on a leg. The Quincana, standing taller, would use its height and reach to its advantage, trying to bring its devastating, slicing jaws down onto the lizard's back or neck. Both animals were covered in that protective osteoderm armor, but against the specialized teeth and immense power of their opponent, that armor could be breached. A single well-placed bite from Quincana could sever a limb or crush a spine. A successful bite from Megalania, even if it was just a glancing blow, could condemn the giant crocodile to a slow, agonizing death from blood loss and shock over the next few hours. There would be no easy victor in such a contest. It would be a true clash of prehistoric titans, a bloody, violent spectacle where even the winner would likely limp away bearing terrible scars, a testament to the lethality of its reptilian rival. Megalania had to contend with the bone-shearing jaws of the marsupial lion and the slicing teeth of the land crocodile. In the brutal landscape of ancient Australia, danger came from all sides. But in the lonely, violent world of a solitary apex predator, the most dangerous, persistent, and evenly matched rival is often one of your very own kind. The greatest threat to a Megalania was, in all likelihood, another Megalania. To understand these internal conflicts, we can look to their living relatives, the Komodo dragons, whose social lives are famously fraught with tension and violence. Like Komodos, adult male Megalania were almost certainly solitary creatures. These were not pack hunters. They were lonely kings, each presiding over a vast home range that could span many square kilometers. This territory was their lifeblood. It contained their hunting grounds, their basking spots, and their access to the two resources that mattered above all else: food and mates. Any other male that encroached upon this territory was not just a visitor, it was a direct challenger to the resident's survival and his right to pass on his genes. When two evenly matched males met, the encounter would have been a spectacle of prehistoric dominance. The conflict would likely begin with ritualized posturing. You can imagine the two giants sizing each other up, their heads held high, their powerful throats inflating with deep, guttural hisses that would echo through the forest. They would engage in a war of intimidation, each trying to make themselves look as large and formidable as possible, hoping the other would back down and concede without a fight. For these creatures, avoiding a physical confrontation was always the preferable outcome, as a real fight, even when won, always carried the risk of injury. But when neither animal was willing to yield, this cold war would erupt into breathtaking violence. Drawing again from the behavior of Komodo dragons, the combat would have been a titanic wrestling match. The two colossal lizards would rise up on their powerful hind legs, using their long, heavy tails as a third leg, a muscular tripod to support their weight. For a few terrifying moments, they would become bipedal monsters, towering over the landscape, grappling and shoving each other with their forelimbs. The goal was simple: to use sheer brute force to throw the opponent off balance and onto the ground. Once a lizard was down, the fight would become a savage biting match. They would snap and tear at each other's heads, necks, and backs, their serrated teeth inflicting deep, ragged wounds. But what about their own deadly venomous bite? It's a fascinating question. Like venomous snakes and Komodo dragons, Megalania would have almost certainly evolved an immunity, or at least a very high resistance, to its own venom. A bite from a rival would not have sent them into the same spiraling shock and unstoppable bleeding that it did their prey. They had a defense against their own secret weapon. However, immunity to venom did not mean they were safe. The sheer physical trauma of these battles would have been immense. A well-placed bite could still crush bone, sever major tendons, or tear out huge chunks of muscle. The deep, open wounds, full of dirt and bacteria, would have been highly susceptible to massive infections. A victorious Megalania might drive off its rival, but it could limp away from the battle with injuries that would hamper its ability to hunt for weeks, or even lead to its death days later. And there is a final, darker dimension to this intraspecific conflict: cannibalism. In the world of monitor lizards, size is everything, and a smaller lizard is just another potential meal. A large, dominant Megalania would not have hesitated to kill and consume a smaller, younger rival it encountered. Juveniles would have lived in constant peril, likely hiding in trees or rock crevices, desperately trying to avoid the notice of the giant cannibals that were their own parents and relatives. For a Megalania, the struggle for life was a battle fought on all fronts, and the threat could emerge not just from the shadows of the forest, but from the terrifying reflection of itself. For more than 1,000,000 years, this was the established order. An intricate, brutal but ultimately balanced world of reptilian kings and their giant marsupial subjects. A world where dominance was decided by sheer size, physical power, and the efficiency of one's killing tools. The seasons turned, the climate shifted, but the fundamental rules of this violent garden remained the same. Megalania reigned supreme. Its rivals were kept in check, and the cycle of life and death continued as it had for eons. But then, on a geological timescale that amounts to little more than the blink of an eye, a new player arrived on the shores of this lost continent. This new predator was physically unimpressive, frail even, compared to the titans that ruled here. It had no armor, no serrated teeth, no venom flowing in its veins. But it carried with it a weapon more potent than any claw or crushing jaw, a mind capable of abstract thought, complex planning, and endless innovation. This new arrival was us, Homo sapiens. Sometime between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago, during the late Pleistocene, the world was in the grip of an ice age. So much of the planet's water was locked up in vast continental glaciers that sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. Islands became mountains on vast coastal plains, and the distances between the land masses of Southeast Asia and the great southern continent of Sahul, the combined land of Australia and New Guinea, were significantly shorter. For the first time, the journey was possible. You have to try and imagine the courage, the desperation, or the sheer curiosity that drove these first people. Standing on a beach in what is now Indonesia, they looked out at an ocean horizon that, to them, was the edge of the known world. Using simple rafts or dugout canoes, vessels that would seem terrifyingly fragile to us today, they undertook what was, at that time, the greatest maritime migration in human history. This was not a single grand voyage, but likely a series of perilous, island-hopping journeys, each a life-or-death gamble into the complete unknown. a generational push into a new world. When they finally made landfall on the northern coast of Sahul, they stepped into a world that was utterly alien. Nothing in their collective evolutionary experience in Africa and Asia could have prepared them for what they found. The predators they knew, tigers, bears, leopards, were gone. In their place was a menagerie of creatures from a different branch of life's tree. They would have encountered kangaroos that stood taller than them, wombats the size of small rhinos, and flightless birds that could look them in the eye. It would have been like stepping onto another planet, a land of surreal giants and strange sounds, governed by ecological rules they had yet to learn. And among all these new and bizarre creatures, there was the king. The science is clear on this point. The latest archaeological dates for human arrival and the most recent fossil dates for Megalania's extinction definitively overlap, for a period of at least several thousand years, and likely much longer. The first Australians and the last of the Megalania walked the same ground at the same time. They drank from the same waterholes. They hunted in the same woodlands. Their paths would have inevitably crossed. This sets the stage for one of the most dramatic, though unrecorded, confrontations in the history of life on Earth. It is the ultimate clash of evolutionary strategies, a contest between two completely different forms of apex predator. In one corner, you have Megalania, the product of millions of years of evolution honing physical power, a masterpiece of primordial strength, size, and biological weaponry. In the other corner, you have humanity, the product of a recent and explosive evolution of cognitive power, a master of cooperation, communication, and technology. What happens when the planet's most intelligent primate, armed with fire and stone, comes face to face with the largest and most powerful terrestrial reptile since the time of the dinosaurs? The answer would not only decide the fate of a monster, it would define the future of an entire continent. Let's leave the realm of scientific abstracts and step, for a moment, into the bare feet of one of your distant ancestors. Imagine you are part of a small family group, perhaps 20 strong, making your way through the tall, alien forests of this new continent. The air is warm, thick with the smell of unfamiliar blossoms and the buzzing of insects. Your entire life has been a masterclass in survival. You can read the tracks of animals, identify edible plants, and you know the habits of the predators you have always lived with. But those predators were mammals. Cats that stalked with feline grace, canids that hunted in familiar packs. Nothing has prepared you for this. Your group emerges from the dense woods into a sun-drenched clearing bordering a quiet billabong. The air is still. Your goal is the water, a vital resource in a long day's journey. As you approach, your eyes scan the area, a lifetime of instinct on high alert. You see something near the water's edge, a long, low shape, mottled with shades of grey and brown, lying utterly motionless. It looks like a massive, fallen log, half buried in the mud, something so large and inert it seems a part of the landscape itself. One of the children in your group lets out a small cry of excitement and takes a step forward, but an elder silences them with a hand on the shoulder. Something is wrong. The silence is too deep. The birds are not singing near that log. And then, the log moves. An eyelid, as thin as parchment, peels back to reveal a dark, reptilian eye. An eye as old as the stone it rests on, unblinking, devoid of any emotion you can recognize. The head, as wide as your torso, slowly turns, and the dawning, paralyzing horror of what you are seeing washes over you. The log is not a log. It is a living creature, and you realize with a jolt of pure primal terror that you have been looking at only a fraction of its immense length. This is not a predator in the way you understand it. A tiger is fearsome, but it is a creature of flesh and hot blood. You can see the twitch of its muscles, hear the panting of its breath. It is knowable. This is something else entirely. Its stillness is absolute, its form alien. Its scaled hide looks more like stone and bark than skin. It doesn't seem to breathe. It simply exists, a malevolent piece of the earth given life. In that moment, it would feel less like an animal and more like a god or a demon, a physical manifestation of the land's ancient hostile power. It is a monster that defies your understanding of the natural order, a challenge to the very rules of the world as you know them. Your group, frozen for a heartbeat, breaks and scatters back into the safety of the trees, your hearts hammering against your ribs. You survive this first encounter. But the world is no longer the same. The mental map of your new home has been instantly and irrevocably redrawn, not with lines of rivers or mountains, but with zones of absolute terror. Every decision from this day forward is shadowed by the memory of that creature. The implications for your survival are immediate and profound. You can no longer travel through dense vegetation without extreme caution. Every thicket is now a potential ambush site. Open ground, once exposing, now seems a far safer path. Your choice of a campsite is no longer a simple matter of comfort and proximity to water. It is now a tactical decision. You seek high ground, caves with narrow entrances, defensible positions with clear lines of sight. At night, the fire is no longer just a source of warmth and a place for community. It is a blazing, life-saving wall between your fragile family and the silent, cold-blooded nightmares that hunt in the darkness. Every journey for food, every trip to the waterhole becomes a high-stakes mission. Sentries are posted. Children are kept close, their youthful freedom curtailed by an ever-present monstrous threat. You look at the spear in your hand, the beautifully napped stone tip so effective against a wallaby or a wild boar. Now you imagine it against that moving mountain of armored hide, and it seems as useless as a splinter. A single human, or even a handful of hunters, stands no chance in a direct confrontation. The power imbalance is absolute. The existence of Megalania becomes a relentless, terrifying evolutionary pressure, forcing your people to rely not on their individual strength, but on the one weapon it cannot match: their collective intelligence. You cannot fight the monster head-on, so you must learn to outthink it. An experience so profound, so existentially terrifying, does not simply fade with time. It is not a memory that belongs to an individual. It is seared into the collective consciousness of a people. And for a society without a written language, for a culture that carries its entire library of knowledge in the minds of its elders, there is only one way to ensure such a vital, life-saving lesson is never forgotten. You turn it into a story. You give the monster a name, and you weave its terror into the very fabric of your cosmology. Oral tradition was the original human survival guide. Long before books or the internet, stories were the vessels that carried critical information across the vast oceans of time from one generation to the next. A story could teach you which berries were poison, how to follow the stars to find your way, or the laws that held your society together. And most importantly, stories were used to encode warnings. They were the high-voltage fences built around the most lethal dangers of the world, designed to instill a healthy and abiding fear in the hearts of the young and reckless. When we look at the rich and ancient folklore of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, we find echoes, powerful, monstrous echoes, of a time when the land was ruled by giant reptiles. Across different language groups, you find tales of the wowie or hui. While the details vary, the core of the creature remains terrifyingly consistent. It is a monstrous, goanna-like lizard of unimaginable size. It lives in deep caves, dark crevices, or at the bottom of remote waterholes, exactly the kinds of places a real ambush predator would inhabit. In the stories, its appetite is limitless. It does not just kill to eat. It is a force of pure destruction, capable of devouring people, families, even entire tribes in a single, gluttonous act. Its passage across the land is said to be so heavy that it shakes the very ground. While no paleontologist would suggest a literal, multi-headed monster existed, the parallels to a creature like Megalania are impossible to ignore. The goanna form, the colossal size, the association with ambush sites, and its status as a superlative predator of humans. Then there is the even more widespread and significant figure of the rainbow serpent. A central creator deity in the Dreamtime of many Aboriginal cultures, the rainbow serpent is an immense, powerful, and often ambivalent being. As it moved across the barren land in the beginning, it carved the rivers and gorges with its body, shaping the world as we know it today. While its form is serpentine, many scholars believe this powerful myth may be a deeply ancient composite memory of the Cenozoic era's giant reptiles. The sheer scale and earth-shattering power of a creator, being that is fundamentally reptilian, resonates strongly with a time when creatures like Megalania and giant snakes like Wanambi were the most formidable and awe-inspiring forces in the natural world. It is crucial to understand that these stories are not literal scientific field reports. They are myths. And the purpose of a myth is not to describe the world exactly as it is, but to explain its meaning and to embed rules for survival within it. Think of these stories as cultural fossils. The original animal, Megalania, is the organism. Over thousands of years, the pressures of culture and storytelling are the sediment that transforms it. Its size is exaggerated for dramatic effect. Its motives are imbued with supernatural malice. Its features become more monstrous. The purpose of this transformation isn't to lie, but to make the lesson more potent. A story about a 7-meter lizard is a warning. A story about a monster that can swallow your whole village is a sacred law, a taboo that ensures no one in their right mind ever travels alone or camps in an unsafe place. The animal itself vanished from the Australian landscape tens of thousands of years ago, but its shadow stretched on, long and dark, across the millennia. It lived on around the flickering light of countless campfires, in the cautionary tales whispered to children, and in the epic sagas of the Dreamtime. These stories may be the most powerful evidence we have for the deep psychological trauma that Megalania inflicted upon the first people who dared to share its world. Stories and fear were powerful defenses. They reshaped human behavior, instilled a life-saving caution, and allowed small, vulnerable groups to survive in a land of giants. But passive survival is not the story of our species. For humanity to truly take root in this new continent, to thrive and expand, they couldn't simply hide from the monsters in the dark. They had to stop being the prey. They had to find a way to fight back. And this is where the tide of our epic story begins to turn. where the frail, intelligent primate begins to leverage an arsenal of weapons that the reptilian king could not possibly comprehend. On a purely physical level, the contest was a joke. A single human hunter, even at peak strength, was hopelessly outmatched. Their thin skin offered no protection, their strength was negligible, and their simple spears, while effective against smaller game, would have seemed like splinters against the armored hide and thick bone of a 600-kilogram lizard. If the battle for Australia had been decided by a one-on-one physical contest, humanity's foothold on the continent would have been brief and tragic. But the fight was never going to be on Megalania's terms. Humans brought to the field a weapon forged over millions of years of evolution, a weapon that was invisible, silent, and overwhelmingly potent. The modern human brain. This was the ultimate advantage. A predator like Megalania, for all its power, is a creature of instinct and reaction. Its world is the immediate present, the scent of prey on the wind, the shadow that means danger, the drive to hunt and reproduce. The human mind, however, had broken free from the tyranny of the now. It could engage in abstract thought. It could remember the past not just as a feeling, but as a detailed narrative, allowing it to learn from mistakes. More importantly, it could imagine multiple possible futures, allowing it to anticipate an enemy's actions and formulate a plan. It could strategize. This strategic ability was amplified by another human superpower, complex language. A pack of wolves can coordinate a hunt with yips and body language, but they cannot communicate a novel, multi-step plan. Humans could. You have to imagine a group of hunters gathered around a fire, using words and gestures to say, "Remember the creature we saw at the gorge? It waits by the rocks in the heat of the day. If we make a noise on this side, it will likely move toward that escape route. You and I will wait there, with our longest spears hidden behind that rise." This ability to share a complex, imagined scenario and then execute it as a team transformed a group of fragile individuals into a single, intelligent, and highly adaptable predatory unit. This knowledge wasn't just shared, it was accumulated. Each Megalania was born with the same set of brilliant instincts as its parents, but it did not learn from their specific life experiences. Humans did. The fatal mistake of one generation became the cautionary tale and survival strategy of the next. Knowledge of the monster's habits, its weaknesses, its preferred hunting grounds, all of it was passed down, refined, and improved upon. This cultural ratcheting effect meant that, with each passing generation, the humans grew smarter, more experienced, and more dangerous. And they had fire. It is impossible to overstate the importance of fire in the human story. It was our first superpower. At its most basic, it was a defensive wall. A roaring campfire at the mouth of a cave was a barrier of light and heat that the cold-blooded, nocturnal hunters of the darkness would be deeply reluctant to cross. It turned the night from a time of terror into a sanctuary of relative safety. But fire was also a weapon. It could be used to harden the tip of a simple wooden spear, making it a far more lethal and durable weapon. And on a grander scale, it could be used to reshape the world itself, a topic we will return to. Humanity was no longer just a participant in the ecosystem. With the brain, with language, and with fire, they were beginning to become its masters. Humanity's mastery of fire extended far beyond the defensive ring of a nightly campfire or the hardened tip of a spear. In the hands of the first Australians, fire became a tool of creation, a force so powerful it would allow them to re-engineer the very landscape of the continent. This practice, a sophisticated system of controlled burning, often called fire stick farming, was one of the most significant ecological forces in Australia's deep history. And for the giant predator that relied on stealth and shadow, it would have a devastating, if entirely unintended, consequence. To understand this, you must first understand the purpose of fire stick farming. This was not the destructive, out-of-control wildfire that we fear today. This was a precise and knowledgeable application of low-intensity, cool burns. Imagine a small group of people moving through the landscape, carrying a smoldering branch or fire stick. They would carefully choose a time when the weather was right, when the fuel on the ground was dry, but the air was not too hot or windy. They would then set a fire that crept slowly across the forest floor, a creeping line of orange that consumed the dead leaf litter, the dry grasses, and the dense, impassable undergrowth. The flames would rarely reach high enough to harm the towering, mature eucalyptus trees, whose thick bark offered natural protection. The goals of this practice were manifold and brilliant. First, it cleared the landscape, making travel easier and safer. By removing the dense scrub, it eliminated the very places where predators, like Megalania, could hide and launch an ambush. Second, it was a form of hunting and gardening. The fire would flush out smaller animals like lizards and wallabies for an easy meal. More importantly, in the weeks after the burn, the ash-fertilized ground would explode with a carpet of fresh, green shoots. This new growth would attract large grazing animals like kangaroos and emus, drawing them to specific, predictable areas and turning the landscape into a natural larder. For the humans, the world they were creating was a vast improvement, a more productive, more legible, and far less dangerous place to live. But for Megalania, this human-engineered world was becoming an alien and hostile environment. Remember that mosaic of shadow and light we described earlier? That intricate patchwork of dense thickets, tangled woodlands, and open clearings that was a perfectly designed killing field for an ambush predator. Fire stick farming systematically dismantled it. Season by season, controlled burn by controlled burn, the landscape was transformed. The impassable thickets that provided the perfect cover were thinned out or eliminated entirely. The once sharp edges between forest and grassland were softened and blurred. The old, complex world was being replaced by a more uniform, open, park-like woodland. For Megalania, this was a catastrophe. Its entire hunting strategy, perfected over 1 million years of evolution, was predicated on its ability to hide its colossal body and launch a surprise attack. You cannot hide a 7-meter, 600-kilogram lizard in an open woodland with a grassy floor. The prey animals, now drawn to the wide open spaces cleared by fire, were no longer forced to travel through the narrow, dangerous corridors of vegetation where the giant predator could lie in wait. Slowly but surely, the humans were stealing the shadows. They were turning a landscape of infinite hiding places into a world with none. It's crucial to understand that the first Australians were almost certainly not setting these fires with the conscious goal of wiping out Megalania. They were not waging a direct war on the monster, at least not in this way. They were simply managing their environment to maximize their own safety and prosperity. The devastating impact on Megalania was a collateral effect of this revolutionary change. It was a slow, inexorable pressure, an environmental strangulation. The humans weren't attacking the monster itself. They were tearing down its house and burning down its hunting blinds, one carefully managed fire at a time. The king of the reptiles was finding itself exposed and vulnerable in a kingdom that no longer looked like home. Altering the landscape was a slow but powerful form of pressure on Megalania, a gradual chipping away at the foundations of its dominance. But the newly arrived humans wielded another, far more direct and devastating weapon in their struggle for survival. They were not just passive architects of the environment, they were active, ruthlessly efficient hunters. They began to systematically dismantle the monster's food supply, hitting it precisely where it hurt the most. To the great herbivores of Australia, humans represented a new and unprecedented kind of danger. These animals had evolved defenses against reptilian ambush predators, a keen sense of smell, vigilance, and sheer size. But they had no evolutionary answer for a predator that could think, plan, cooperate, and kill from a distance. Humans were what ecologists now call hyper-predators. Their intelligence, combined with projectile weapons like the spear and the atlatl, or spear thrower, allowed them to inflict fatal wounds without ever engaging in a risky, close-quarters physical struggle. Let's revisit the great Megafauna, but this time, see them through the eyes of a human hunter. Consider the Diprotodon. For Megalania, this 2-ton beast was a formidable challenge requiring a specialized venomous attack. For a coordinated group of humans, it was simply the largest and most rewarding prize on the continent. Its slow, lumbering pace and predictable herd behavior made it the perfect target. A single successful kill could feed a large group for weeks. Its thick hide could be used for shelter and clothing, its massive bones and tusks fashioned into tools and ornaments. The incentive to hunt them was enormous. The hunt itself would not have been a heroic, one-on-one battle. It would have been a masterpiece of strategic thinking. You can imagine a group of hunters patiently observing a herd, identifying a young or isolated individual, and then working together. Perhaps they would use fire and noise to stampede the herd towards a natural trap, like a cliff edge or a deep bog where the heavy animals would become hopelessly mired. Or perhaps they would employ persistence hunting, a tactic our species perfected in Africa, relentlessly jogging after a single animal for hours, not allowing it to rest or drink, until the giant simply collapsed from exhaustion and heat stress. The same strategic approach would have been applied to the giant kangaroo, Prehistoric. While faster and more agile, it was still vulnerable to coordinated attacks that could flank it, cut off its escape, and bring it down with a volley of precisely thrown spears. Archaeological sites across Australia stand as grim testaments to this efficiency. Places like Cuddy Springs have yielded megafauna bones in direct association with stone tools, evidence that humans were not just killing these giants, but butchering and processing them on a significant scale. The result of this unprecedented hunting pressure was a catastrophic decline in the populations of large herbivores across the continent. The fossil record is painfully clear. Shortly after the timeline of human arrival and expansion, the numbers of Diprotodon, Prehistoric, and other giant browsers begin to plummet towards extinction. For Megalania, this was a disaster. The entire existence of a large apex predator is built upon the assumption of a stable and abundant supply of prey. Its slow metabolism and immense size were perfectly adapted to a world of plenty, where a multi-ton meal was always just one patient ambush away. But now, its hunting grounds were falling silent. The great herds were thinning, disappearing from the landscape. The patient wait in the undergrowth that once almost guaranteed a meal now ended in nothing. For an animal that needed to consume vast quantities of meat to survive, this was the beginning of a famine that would last forever. The humans were not just stealing the occasional meal from the king's table. They were demolishing the entire pantry. The bottom of the food pyramid was being systematically eroded, and Megalania, perched precariously at the very top, was the most exposed to its collapse. It was a two-front war. As the fires of humanity burned away its hiding places, the spears of humanity were killing its food. The million-year reign of the great reptile was being pushed towards a final, desperate crisis. It is a tempting and simple narrative to lay the entire blame for the extinction of Australia's giants at the feet of humanity. Our species has, after all, proven itself to be the most transformative and often destructive force in the planet's history. But the story of this great dying is more complex, more tragic. As the first Australians were spreading across the continent, waging their indirect war of fire and their direct war on the food chain, another even greater power was at work. The planet itself was changing, and it was turning against its largest children. The time frame we are discussing, the late Pleistocene, corresponds with the peak of the last great ice age. While this conjures images of vast glaciers and bitter cold in the northern hemisphere, its effects elsewhere were vastly different. An ice age is a period of immense global instability. As colossal sheets of ice advanced across North America and Eurasia, they locked up a staggering volume of the world's fresh water. This had a profound effect on global weather patterns. With less water available for evaporation, rainfall became less reliable, and many regions of the world began a long, slow descent into dryness. For Australia, this shift was catastrophic. The continent began a process of intense aridification. You have to imagine the landscape beginning to parch. The reliable monsoon rains that had for millennia nourished the vast inland forests and savannas began to falter, their paths shifting south away from the continent's heart. The life-giving arteries of the land, the once permanent rivers and sprawling wetlands, began to shrink. They retreated into a series of disconnected, muddy pools, becoming focal points of desperate competition before vanishing entirely, leaving behind nothing but beds of cracked, sun-baked earth. The very air grew hotter and drier. As the water vanished, the vegetation followed. The lush, soft-leaved flowering plants and shrubs that the great herbivores like Diprotodon relied upon began to wither and die back. In their place, tougher, more drought-resistant and fire-adapted species began to advance. Spiky spinifex grasses, hardy acacias, and other desert-adapted shrubs. These were plants that offered far less nutrition and were much harder to digest. The great continental buffet that had sustained the megafauna was slowly being replaced with a far leaner, harsher menu. The vast green interior of the continent began its inexorable transformation into the red desert we know today. This environmental stress was a crushing weight on all animal life. Every creature felt the growing scarcity of water and the decline in food quality. Smaller, more adaptable animals could perhaps survive by migrating long distances, by burrowing to escape the heat, or by switching to different food sources. But for the megafauna, a group of specialists defined by their immense size, this level of adaptation was often impossible. The largest animals were hit the hardest. The very biology of being a giant is a contract with a world of abundance. A 2-ton Diprotodon needed to consume a massive volume of browse and drink huge quantities of water every single day just to survive. As its food sources became tougher and more sparse, and the waterholes dried up, it would have had to travel farther and farther, expending more precious energy for dwindling returns. Herds would have become stressed, malnourished, and less successful at breeding. The same applied to their great predator. Megalania's survival depended on a vast territory teeming with healthy giant prey. As the herds weakened and thinned out, its own food supply became unreliable. The very asset that had made these creatures kings, their sheer size, now became their anchor, chaining them to a level of resource consumption that the drying land could no longer support. This climate-driven crisis was not a separate problem happening in isolation. It was a devastating threat multiplier. The great herds were already stumbling, weakened by thirst and hunger, making them even easier targets for the intelligent, newly arrived human hunters. The changing climate was a force that amplified every other pressure on the ecosystem, weakening the megafauna from within and pushing the entire magnificent system towards a catastrophic tipping point. But why? Why, in a time of crisis, should the largest, strongest, and seemingly most successful animals be the first to fall? It feels counterintuitive. In a world defined by struggle, shouldn't size and power be the ultimate assets? The tragic answer lies in a biological paradox, a fatal trade-off that we can call the megafauna's curse. The very things that made these giants magnificent were the same things that made them exquisitely fragile. First, consider the immense biological cost of being big. Think of the body of a giant animal as a massive, inefficient engine that is always running. Just to stay alive, a multi-ton herbivore like Diprotodon had to consume an enormous volume of vegetation every single day. A predator like Megalania, in turn, needed to consume that herbivore. A small wallaby can thrive on a small patch of grass and a little bit of water. A Diprotodon needed a whole field. This voracious need for resource meant that megafauna required vast, healthy, and productive territories to support them. As the climate grew drier and human activities began to alter the landscape, these large, unbroken tracts of prime habitat began to shrink and fragment. The giants were being squeezed into ever smaller, less productive pockets of land, their colossal engines beginning to run on fumes. But the most critical part of the curse was not how they lived, but how they reproduced. In ecology, there are two broad strategies for life. On one end, you have the R strategists. Think of rats or insects. Their plan is to live fast, reproduce in huge numbers, and die young. A catastrophe might wipe out 90% of their population, but the surviving 10% can repopulate the area in a geological blink of an eye. Their strength is in their numbers and their speed. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the K strategists. These are the artisans of the animal kingdom. Elephants, whales, and the great megafauna are the ultimate K strategists. Their plan is to live long, stable lives and to invest an enormous amount of time and energy into producing just a few high-quality offspring. They trade quantity for quality. Let's apply this to Megalania. Based on large reptiles today, we can surmise its life cycle. A female Megalania would have likely laid a relatively small clutch of leathery eggs, perhaps burying them in a mound of soil and vegetation. After a long incubation period, the hatchlings would emerge as small, vulnerable versions of their parents, facing a world of immense danger, including the constant threat of being eaten by adult Megalania. It would have then taken many years, perhaps a decade, maybe even two, for a young Megalania to navigate this gauntlet of perils and grow large enough to be safe, dominant, and finally able to reproduce itself. Now you can see the fatal flaw in this otherwise successful strategy. What this means is that their populations had almost no ability to bounce back from a crisis. Every adult Megalania that starved during a drought, or every failed nesting season because of environmental stress, was a devastating loss that the population could not quickly replace. They were living on a biological knife's edge, with a growth rate so slow it was almost static. They simply could not outbreed the mounting death toll. This was the Megafauna's curse in full effect. These were titans built for a world of stability and abundance, with a life strategy that gambled everything on a predictable future. But they found themselves trapped in a rapidly changing world of scarcity and unprecedented threats. Their high-demand bodies couldn't cope with the dwindling resources, and their slow-lane life cycle meant recovery from setbacks was impossible. Their greatest evolutionary asset, their magnificent, awe-inspiring size, had become their fatal, inescapable weakness. For decades, the scientific world has been locked in a great debate over the cause of this mass extinction. Was it a story of chill or ill? Did the changing climate, the chill of the Ice Age and the heat of the subsequent droughts, kill off the giants? Or was it the ill of human overkill, the deadly impact of the newly arrived spear-wielding hunters? The evidence we have explored, painted in the fossil record and the ancient earth, suggests that the search for a single culprit is a mistake. The answer is not one or the other. The real killer was the devastating synergy of both forces acting at once. It was not a single blow, but a two-pronged attack. It was a perfect storm. Think of it this way. The first great weather front to move across the continent was climate change. This was the vast, impersonal, and slow-moving force of planetary mechanics. The increasing aridity was a systemic poison, weakening the entire ecosystem from within. It stressed the plant life, it stole the water from the rivers, and it put every single large animal under immense physiological pressure. It was the long, grueling drought that left the entire forest brittle and tinder dry. This climatic shift, on its own, would have caused a significant die-off. It made the megafauna sick, hungry, and thirsty, reducing their breeding success and shrinking their populations. They were already stumbling. Then, the second front hit. The arrival of humans was the lightning strike in that drought-stricken forest. This was an acute, intelligent, and ruthlessly adaptable pressure. Where the climate was a blunt instrument, humanity was a spear point, targeting the very weaknesses that the changing environment had already exposed. The two forces didn't just add to each other, they multiplied each other's destructive power. Consider the dwindling waterholes. As the climate dried the landscape, the last remaining sources of permanent water became critical, magnetic points for every animal for hundreds of kilometers around. The great herds of Diprotodon were now concentrated, their movements predictable. For a hunter, this is a dream scenario. Human groups could simply camp near these vital resources, picking off the weakened, desperate animals that had no choice but to come and drink. The climate created the trap. Humans were the perfect executioners. Or consider the fragmentation of their habitat. The deepening droughts would have made vast tracts of the interior unlivable, forcing megafauna populations into smaller, isolated pockets of land along the coast or in mountain ranges where there was still enough water. These refuges were then directly impacted by human fire stick farming, which further altered and shrank the available space. The once great continental populations were broken apart into small, disconnected island groups, unable to migrate, and vulnerable to being wiped out one by one. You can imagine Megalania and the other giants caught in the jaws of a colossal pincer movement, a strategic trap from which there was no escape. From one side, the slow, grinding pressure of a hostile climate was closing in, stealing their water and starving their prey. From the other, the swift, intelligent pressure of a new and utterly relentless predator was advancing, stealing their shadows with fire and decimating the last of the weakened herds with spears. If they fled from the humans, they entered lands ravaged by drought. If they sought refuge from the drought in the last green valleys, they found them already occupied by humans. Every path led to a dead end. For a slow reproducing K strategist like Megalania, this combined assault was simply insurmountable. The pace of change and the complexity of the threats were too much, too fast. The world was being unmade around it. Its extinction was not a simple murder mystery with a single villain. It was a tragedy of convergence, a cascading system failure brought on by two of the most powerful forces on Earth, one planetary, one human, arriving at the same devastating moment in deep time. A storm of this magnitude does not kill a species overnight. The end, when it came, was not a single fiery apocalypse. There was no final cataclysmic battle between man and monster. The extinction of a K strategist is a slow, drawn-out, and deeply lonely affair. It is a story of dwindling returns and fading echoes. To understand the final act of this tragedy, we must try to imagine the world through the unblinking eyes of the very last of the great roamers. In those final millennia, the once continent-spanning dynasty of Megalania was shattered. Its populations were no longer a continuous presence, but a series of isolated, beleaguered pockets, clinging to existence in the last few corners of the world that had not yet turned completely against them. You can imagine these refuges, a well-watered mountain valley in the Great Dividing Range, a remote and tangled coastal forest, a series of caves in a rocky escarpment, as islands of the past, surrounded by a vast and growing sea of a new, drier, human-dominated reality. Within these islands, the last survivors played out their final hands. Let's imagine one of them. An old male, a giant even by the standards of his kind, scarred from 100 territorial battles fought in a world that no longer exists. His is a world of ghosts. He patrols his familiar territory, but the great herds of Diprotodon are gone. The scent that once hung heavy in the air is now just a faint, ancestral memory. His patient, hours-long ambushes, which once almost guaranteed a feast, now end in nothing for days, then weeks at a time. Hunger becomes a constant dull ache, a slow drain on his immense strength. His once colossal muscles begin to waste away. His armored hide hangs loose over his great frame, and his explosive lunge becomes a labored surge. The world around him has fallen silent. He hasn't caught the scent of a rival male for years. The deep guttural hisses of courtship and combat that once defined the seasons are gone. He is utterly alone, the last god in a world that has forgotten him, a living relic of an age of titans, wandering through a world that now belongs to the nimble and the clever. His final hunts are desperate, undignified affairs, chasing after smaller, faster wallabies that offer barely enough meat to fuel his shrinking furnace of a body. This is how the end came. It was not a single dramatic event, but a quiet fading, a slow subtraction that played out over thousands of years, in hundreds of isolated valleys just like this one. In one refuge, the last breeding pair fails to produce a clutch of eggs due to malnutrition. In another, a handful of juveniles are picked off one by a band of increasingly confident human hunters. In this valley, our old male, weakened by starvation, finally lies down in the shade of a rock outcropping and does not get up again. The world does not shudder. The humans who might stumble upon his massive, decaying carcass weeks later would have no sense of the significance of the moment. To them, it is just a source of bone for tools and a story to tell around the fire. The fossil record is our only witness to this silent passing. The geological layers that once held the bones of Megalania in abundance go quiet. The trail of evidence grows cold. The science suggests that the final curtain fell for this magnificent species sometime between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, and with that, a reign that had lasted for well over 1.5 million years came to an end. It concluded not with a climactic roar, but with a final, silent exhalation of breath in a quiet corner of a forgotten forest. The greatest predator Australia had ever known was gone. Its throne left vacant, its kingdom forever changed by the storm that had brought it down. The death of the last Megalania was a silent event, but its absence created a deafening roar in the ecological fabric of Australia. An ecosystem is not a simple collection of species. It is an intricate web of connections, and Megalania was an anchor point holding countless threads in place. When you remove a keystone predator of that magnitude, the entire structure begins to shift and warp, settling into a new and unfamiliar shape. The continent was now a kingdom without its ancient reptilian king, and a different order was about to begin. The most immediate consequence was a power vacuum at the very top of the food chain. No single animal could step in to fill the colossal niche that Megalania left behind. Its unique combination of size, power, and ambush strategy was irreplaceable. However, its disappearance would have dramatically changed the fortunes of the continent's smaller, mid-tier predators. Creatures like the Thylacoleo, the Tasmanian tiger, and even the newly arrived humans would have suddenly found the world a less dangerous place. With the great lizard gone, there was no longer a threat of having a hard-won kill stolen by a 600-kilogram bully. This release from competitive suppression may have allowed their populations to expand into new territories. For the surviving herbivores, like the ancestors of modern kangaroos, wallabies, and emus, life was fundamentally altered. For the first time in over 1 million years, their evolutionary history was no longer shaped by the need to evade a colossal, earth-shaking ambush predator. The intense pressure that had honed their senses and driven their behavior was gone. They could now move more freely through the landscape, their choice of habitat governed more by the availability of food and water, and less by the terrifying need to avoid dense, tangled thickets. The shadow of the monster had lifted, but the ghost of Megalania and all the other extinct megafauna still haunts the Australian landscape today, in the most peculiar of places, its plant life. The continent's flora is filled with what ecologists call evolutionary anachronisms, features on plants that make no sense in the modern world, leftovers from a time when they had to deal with giant animals. You can find shrubs with incredibly tough, fibrous, and often toxic leaves, a level of chemical and physical defense that seems like complete overkill for a modern kangaroo, but which would have been essential to deter the relentless browsing of a 2-ton Diprotodon. Even more evocatively, you can find trees that produce large, fleshy fruits with enormous seeds, far too big for any living native animal to effectively eat and disperse. These megafaunal fruits were perfectly sized for a giant herbivore to swallow whole. The animal would then wander for miles before depositing the seed in a pile of ready-made fertilizer, allowing the plant to spread its offspring across the landscape. Today, with their giant dispersal partners gone, these plants are orphans. Their fruit often just rots at the base of the parent tree. They are broadcasting an invitation to a feast, but the guests have been gone for 40,000 years. And in the silence left by the absence of the great reptiles and marsupial lions, one predator was now left completely unchallenged. With Megalania gone, humanity was, for the first time, the undisputed apex predator of Australia. There was nothing left that could realistically hunt a healthy adult human. There was nothing that could intimidate a group of hunters off a kill. This newfound absolute security would have been a revolutionary change, allowing human populations to expand and innovate, to spread into every corner of the continent with a new level of confidence. The primal, existential fear of the monster was gone, replaced by the quiet assurance of the master. The great reptile king was dead. Long live the new human king. The story we have told of titanic hunts, venomous bites, and a world reshaped by fire and ice is an epic of deep time. But it is a story pieced together from the most tantalizing and often frustrating of clues. Fragments of bone, a single serrated tooth found in a dry creek bed, the faint chemical whispers left behind in ancient soil. Our knowledge of Megalania is not a complete book handed down through the ages. It is a gripping scientific detective story, and the investigation is still very much alive. It's important to understand the central challenge facing the paleontologists who study this creature. Unlike some of the more famous dinosaurs, no one has ever found a complete, perfectly articulated skeleton of a Megalania lying pristine in the rock. The fossil record is a vast, million-piece jigsaw puzzle, where 99% of the pieces are missing, and the few that we do have are often broken, weathered, and scattered across a continent. Reconstructing this animal is an act of incredible skill, a blend of hard science and informed artistry. The work begins in the field, under the vast, hot skies of the Australian outback. The paleontological detectives spend countless hours surveying remote landscapes, their eyes trained to spot the subtle difference in color and texture that might indicate a fossil weathering out of the ancient earth. When a clue is found, the work slows to a crawl. The excavation is a delicate process, more akin to archaeology than digging. Dental picks, brushes, and specialized adhesive are used to painstakingly free the fragile, mineralized bone from the stone that has been its tomb for 50,000 years or more. Every piece is mapped, photographed, and carefully jacketed in plaster for its long journey to the lab. Once there, the 21st century forensic toolkit is opened, and this is where the story truly comes to life. Scientists can now use medical CT scanners to peer inside a fossilized skull without ever touching a chisel to it. By creating a stack of digital X-rays, they can build a three-dimensional model of the skull's interior. This allows them to reconstruct the size and shape of the brain cavity, to see the passages for nerves and blood vessels, and to analyze the internal structure that gave the skull its immense strength. They can see the size of the lobes associated with smell, giving them clues about how well the animal could sense its world. Chemical analysis of the fossils themselves can unlock even more secrets. By studying the different isotopes, or atomic variants, of elements like carbon and oxygen trapped in the bone, scientists can uncover a chemical diary of the creature's life. These signatures can reveal what kind of water the animal drank, which tells us about the climate it lived in. They can even reveal the types of plants its prey were eating, helping to reconstruct the entire food web. And then there is the magic of biomechanics and computer modeling. By laser scanning the surviving bones, researchers can create perfect digital models. They can then reassemble these pieces on a computer screen, filling in the missing gaps based on the anatomy of living relatives. They add virtual muscles, attaching them to the bone where fossilized scars indicate they once were. Then they can run simulations, testing how the animal might have moved, how fast it could run, and, most terrifyingly, how powerful its bite was. This is how we can move from simple speculation to scientifically grounded estimates, transforming a collection of fragments into a living, breathing, and functioning virtual animal. The story of Megalania is therefore not set in stone. It is a living document, constantly being revised and updated. Every new fossil fragment adds a new sentence. Every new technological analysis can add a new chapter, or force us to dramatically rethink an old one. The great reptile is long gone, but its secrets are still rising from the ancient earth, piece by piece. The scientific detectives are still on the case, ensuring that the tale of the great Roma will continue to be told, each year with a little more clarity and a little more awe. When the fossil clues run out, the chemical signatures fade, and the computer models can take us no further, where do the scientific detectives turn? To find the missing pages of Megalania's story, they must look for a living translation, a creature that carries the ancient genetic legacy forward into the present day. To understand the ancient king, you must journey to the small volcanic islands of Indonesia and meet its closest living relative, the formidable modern-day dragon of Komodo. As the world's largest living lizard, the Komodo dragon is itself a magnificent and terrifying predator, a living fossil from an age of giants. It belongs to the very same genus as Megalania, Varanus, making it our most vital window into the biology and behavior of its extinct Australian cousin. By studying these modern dragons with a meticulous eye, we can breathe life into the cold, silent bones of the past. The similarities are striking, a ghostly echo across 50,000 years of time. The general body plan is the same. The low-slung, powerful frame, the armored skin studded with osteoderms, the muscular tail that acts as both a weapon and a stabilizer. The hunting strategy is a mirror image. The Komodo dragon is a master of ambush, using its keen sense of smell to track its prey and its mottled camouflage to lie in wait for hours, patiently anticipating the perfect moment to strike with an explosive burst of speed. Most tellingly, we see the ghost of Megalania's secret weapon in the Komodo's own bite. The dragon's mouth is also armed with serrated, flesh-tearing teeth, and its lower jaw contains glands that produce a complex venom. This venom is, just as we suspect Megalania's was, a potent anticoagulant that sends its victims into shock and prevents their blood from clotting. When we watch a Komodo dragon land a single debilitating bite on a large water buffalo, and then patiently track it for hours as the venom does its gruesome work, we are almost certainly watching a playbook written by its giant ancestor, performed on a slightly smaller stage. The behavioral parallels are just as strong. The fierce territorial battles between male Komodos, where they rear up on their hind legs in a titanic wrestling match, provide our best and most vivid model for how two male Megalania would have settled their disputes. The grim reality of cannibalism, the lonely, solitary nature of the adults, these behaviors, observed in the living, allow us to infer the social dynamics of the extinct. The The Komodo dragon is our biological Rosetta Stone, a living key that helps us translate the fragmentary language of the fossil record into a rich and plausible story of a life once lived. And yet, for all these invaluable similarities, studying the Komodo dragon also serves to highlight the truly mind-boggling scale of what has been lost. It is here that we must confront the staggering difference. A very large male Komodo dragon might reach 3 meters in length and weigh around 90 kilograms, or 200 pounds. It is an impressive beast by any standard. But a large Megalania was more than twice as long and at least 6 times heavier. This is not just a difference of degree, it is a difference in kind. An animal operating on that scale is a fundamentally different ecological force. A Komodo dragon is a monster that can kill a person. A Megalania was a monster that could have potentially dismantled their vehicle. The prey is different too. While a Komodo dragon might ambitiously tackle a water buffalo, Megalania was preying on rhino-sized marsupials, animals that would have dwarfed any prey a Komodo has ever faced. The Komodo dragon, this modern titan, is merely a shadow, a faint echo of the true king. It is our best guide to the world of Megalania, but it is also a constant, humbling reminder of the almost unimaginable power and grandeur of the creature that is truly gone. The Komodo dragon is a living, breathing link to a prehistoric past, a tangible connection to the world Megalania inhabited. But for some, seeing this smaller echo is not enough. The idea of Megalania is so potent, so deeply awe-inspiring, that it has inevitably spawned one of the most tantalizing questions in the world of cryptozoology. What if it never really went extinct? Could this giant roamer still be out there, a living relic hiding in the vast, unexplored corners of the Australian continent? It is a thrilling thought. Over the decades, stories have emerged from the remote outback. Tales from ranches of impossibly large reptiles seen at a distance, blurry photographs of strange shapes in the bush, plaster casts of tracks that defy easy explanation. These modern stories feel like a continuation of the ancient folklore, a testament to the powerful grip that a real-life monster can hold on our collective psyche. The notion that a creature we thought long dead might still be silently patrolling the wilderness is a deeply romantic and exciting one. But when we apply the cold, hard lens of science and ecology to this question, the beautiful myth begins to crumble. Let's begin with the most fundamental requirement for any species' survival: a viable population. For a species to persist, you don't just need 1 or 2 lonely individuals. You need a large, healthy, interbreeding population, likely numbering in the hundreds, if not thousands, to avoid genetic collapse. A single lonely monster, hiding in a remote valley, cannot sustain a species. It is a biological impossibility. So the question is not, could one Megalania be alive? But rather, could a population of hundreds of Megalania be alive and remain completely hidden? This is where the second problem arises: the ecological footprint. A population of predators this size would leave an enormous, impossible-to-miss signature on the environment. An adult Megalania needed to eat vast quantities of meat to survive. A population of them would need to be consuming thousands of tons of meat every single year. So, the first question a biologist would ask is, what are they eating? The largest native herbivores in Australia today are red kangaroos. They are a fraction of the size of Diprotodon. A predator like Megalania would tear through modern kangaroo populations, leaving a trail of devastation that ecologists would spot immediately. Even if they turned to hunting livestock, ranchers would be reporting massive, inexplicable losses of cattle and sheep on a scale that would make headlines. And then there is the most damning lack of evidence of all: the physical proof. A 600-kilogram lizard cannot move through the world without leaving a trace. It would leave giant, distinctive tracks. It would leave large droppings. And most importantly, it would die. Where are the bodies? Where are the bones? In over 2 centuries of intensive European settlement, an era of widespread agriculture, mining, infrastructure projects, and now satellite imagery and drone surveillance, not one single piece of verifiable physical evidence has ever been found. Not one bone, not one tooth, not one shred of skin has ever been presented for scientific analysis. So, if the evidence isn't there, why does the myth persist? The answer, perhaps, has more to do with us than it does with the lizard. It stems from a deep-seated and wonderful human desire for a world that is not yet fully mapped, tamed, and explained. We long for mystery. We want to believe that there are still dragons in the dark places of the world. The idea that a creature of such primordial power could have survived against all odds connects us to a wilder, more epic past, and it makes the modern world feel a little less predictable and a little more magical. So, could Megalania still be out there? The answer, according to all available science, is a definitive no. The great reptile lives on in only 2 places: in the cold, hard stone of the fossil record, and in the fiery heat of human imagination. And perhaps, for a creature this magnificent, being the undisputed king of both realms is a fitting and powerful legacy. Our desire to believe in living monsters is a fascinating quirk of the modern mind. But what if it's more than just a simple wish for a more magical world? What if that feeling is an echo, a faint, psychological shadow cast across millennia from a time when the monsters were undeniably real? The thousands of years our species spent sharing a continent with Megalania may not have just shaped Australia's ecology. It may have left a permanent, resonant imprint on our own psychology. The human brain is an evolutionary marvel, but it did not develop in the safe, predictable environments we inhabit today. It was forged in the crucible of the Pleistocene, a world teeming with lethal predators. Our deepest, most primal instincts for fear, caution, and risk assessment were tuned by the daily threat of being hunted. It is why the sudden rustle of leaves in the dark can still make our hearts pound, and why we have an innate, deeply ingrained wariness of snakes and spiders. These are the whispers of our ancestors, the lessons learned from countless tragedies in the deep past. And there is one monster that seems to whisper to us from a deeper, more universal past than any other: the dragon. Consider the incredible persistence of this myth. From the imperial dragons of China, to the treasure-hoarding serpents of European folklore, to the feathered serpents of Mesoamerican cultures, civilizations that had no contact with one another, all independently conceived of giant, powerful reptilian beasts. Where did this shared archetypal monster come from? One compelling theory is that the dragon is a composite, evolutionary memory of the various giant predators our species encountered as we spread out of Africa and across the globe. A blend of giant snakes, massive crocodiles, and in the case of Australia, a very real 7-meter monitor lizard. Megalania was not a dragon. It was one of the original blueprints for the very idea of a dragon. But here is the crucial difference. For most of human history, for most cultures, the dragon was a creature of myth and legend, a powerful symbol dwelling in the realm of stories. In Australia, for thousands of years, the dragon was real. The fear was not abstract or symbolic. It was the concrete, rational, and ever-present fear that the mottled log by the waterhole was not a log at all. It was the knowledge that a single moment of carelessness, a single misstep on a familiar path, could result in a swift and terrifying death. This was a unique and incredibly intense selective pressure, a psychological crucible that few other human populations have ever had to endure. An experience this profound doesn't just create fear. It forges character. It is in the face of such overwhelming threats that our most human qualities are often honed. To survive in the land of the giant Roma would have demanded a level of resilience and environmental awareness that is difficult for us to even comprehend. It would have powerfully reinforced the necessity of cooperation and social cohesion. A lone human was a potential victim. A tightly knit, communicative group of humans, sharing knowledge and coordinating their actions, was a formidable power. In a strange way, the monster in the shadows would have strengthened their bonds with each other, making the community the ultimate shield against the terrors of the wild. This daily reality would have also instilled a profound and humbling respect for the power of nature. For the first Australians, the landscape was not a gentle garden to be tamed, but a living, breathing entity of immense power, a place that demanded constant vigilance, deep knowledge, and reverence. The monster was a terror, yes, but it was also a teacher. It taught brutal but vital lessons of caution, community, and courage. And in the end, by surviving the age of monsters, the first Australians proved that the most powerful force on the landscape was not the claw or the tooth, but the collaborative human spirit. The story of Megalania can feel like a myth, a fantastical tale from a world so distant it hardly seems real. It's easy to file it away as a piece of ancient history, a monster story with no bearing on our modern lives. But to do so is to miss its most vital and urgent message. The fall of this ancient titan is not just a tragedy of the past. It is a profound cautionary tale for the present, a story that holds three critical lessons for our own turbulent and rapidly changing world. The first lesson is about the illusion of invincibility. For over 1.5 million years, Megalania was the undisputed apex of its environment. It was a biological fortress, an evolutionary masterpiece, a predator so powerful it likely had no fear of any other living thing. If ever there was a creature that seemed destined to last forever, this was it, and yet it vanished. Its long and successful reign was, in the grand scheme of things, brought to a sudden and definite end. Its extinction teaches us a humbling lesson about fragility. It proves that no species, no matter how dominant, no matter how perfectly adapted to its world, is guaranteed a permanent place in the future. Today we see the modern titans of our world, polar bears, great white sharks, tigers, facing their own existential threats. The story of Megalania is a stark reminder that dominance is temporary, and survival is never a birthright. The second lesson is a chillingly relevant echo of our own time. Megalania did not die in a stable world. It died in a world undergoing rapid and severe climate change. The increasing aridity that gripped Australia, altering the vegetation and causing water sources to vanish, was a relentless pressure that weakened the entire ecosystem from the inside out. This ancient climate crisis serves as a powerful natural experiment, a glimpse into what happens when the fundamental rules of an environment change. We see how specialists, animals like Megalania, that are exquisitely adapted to a specific set of conditions and a specific food source, are the most vulnerable. In a stable world, being a specialist is a great advantage. In a changing world, it can be a death sentence. As our own planet warms and weather patterns become more extreme, the struggle of Megalania during the Great Drying of Australia is a story being replayed by countless species all around us. It is a clear and unambiguous warning, written in the fossil record, about the profound and cascading consequences of a shifting climate. Finally, the third lesson is about us, and the ancient, awesome power of human impact. There is a common and comforting tendency to think of our species' destructive influence on the environment as a modern phenomenon, a recent problem born from the Industrial Revolution, from chainsaws, bulldozers, and factories. The story of Megalania utterly demolishes that idea. It teaches us that our species has been a planet-altering force for tens of thousands of years. The first Australians, with a toolkit consisting of nothing more than fire, stone, and wood, were able to systematically re-engineer the landscape and hunt the continent's largest animals to the brink of extinction. This is perhaps the most sobering lesson of all. If a population of just a few thousand hunter-gatherers could have such a profound and decisive impact on their ecosystem, it forces us to confront the truly terrifying scale of our influence today. With a global population approaching 8 billion people, and with technologies that give us an almost godlike power to reshape the planet, the story of Megalania serves as a baseline, a measure of our ancient capacity to bring about monumental change. It reminds us that our role as ecosystem engineers is not a new one, and that the responsibility that comes with that power is older and deeper than we can possibly imagine. The lessons from Megalania's extinction are written on a grand scale, warnings about climate, humanity, and the fragility of life itself. But its departure also left behind smaller, stranger, and more intimate scars on the Australian landscape. To find them, you have to know how to look. You have to learn to see the evidence of absence. You have to learn to see the ghost in the ecosystem. This ghost is most clearly seen in the continent's plant life, in a phenomenon known as evolutionary anachronisms. An anachronism is something that belongs to a different time period, and in biology, it refers to a trait in a living species that was adapted for an interaction with a species that is now extinct. The Australian bush is full of them. We spoke earlier of the megafaunal fruits, large, tough fruits with massive seeds that no living native animal is large enough to effectively eat and disperse. These plants are carrying on a conversation with a ghost. They are still offering a deal, a trade of food for seed dispersal, to the giant Diprotodons and other mega herbivores that vanished 40,000 years ago. They are orphans, still waiting for their evolutionary partners to return. The land remembers the giants in other ways, too. Botanists find plants with thorns, spines, and chemical toxins in their leaves that seem absurdly over-engineered to defend against the gentle browsing of a modern kangaroo or wallaby. These plants are still braced for an attack from a 2-ton herbivore that will never come again. They are living monuments to the intense pressure exerted by a megafauna that is long gone, a testament to how deeply these colossal animals shaped every single level of their environment, right down to the chemical composition of a leaf. The other way we can see the ghost of Megalania is by tracing the ripples its disappearance sent through the entire food web. When you remove a top predator, it triggers a trophic cascade, a chain reaction of consequences that flows down through all levels of the ecosystem. The removal of Megalania would have been like pulling a critical block from the bottom of a Jenga tower. The whole structure doesn't necessarily collapse, but it shudders, shifts, and resettles into a new and often less stable configuration. Let's follow the cascade. At the top, Megalania vanishes. At the level just below it, mid-sized predators like the Thylacine and giant goannas are suddenly released from the competitive pressure and direct threat of the apex king. Their populations may have boomed, at least for a time. This, in turn, would have dramatically increased the predatory pressure on their prey, the smaller kangaroos, wallabies, and birds. Simultaneously, those same herbivores were now free from the terror of Megalania, which might have changed their very behavior. This complete reshuffling of predator-prey dynamics would have then cascaded down to the lowest level, the plants. As the populations and behaviors of the herbivores changed, so too would their grazing and browsing patterns, altering the very structure of the forests and grasslands. For a trained ecologist, the modern Australian bush is a haunted place. They are trained to see not only what is there, but what is missing. They can see the empty niche at the top of the food chain, the orphaned plants, the broken links in the web of life. Megalania is gone, but the shape of the hole it left in the fabric of nature is still perfectly preserved. It is a ghost whose presence is defined by its profound and everlasting absence, a silent, continent-sized testament to the intricate interconnectedness of all life. We have spoken of events that took place 40 or 50,000 years ago, numbers that already feel immense, almost beyond the grasp of our short human lifespans. The fall of the Roman Empire was just 2,000 years ago. The building of the Great Pyramids, a mere 4,500. These feel like the very limits of our historical memory. But to truly understand the story of Megalania, to appreciate its rightful place in the history of life, we must recalibrate our sense of time. We must take a step back, much further back, and embark on a dizzying journey through the staggering abyss of deep time. The reign of Megalania was not a brief or fleeting moment. From the time the first of its kind patrolled the Australian woodlands to the time the very last one drew its final lonely breath, at least 1.5 million years passed. 1,500,000 years. The number is so vast it is practically meaningless without a sense of scale. So let's try to put it in perspective. Imagine you could compress that entire 1.5 million year reign into a single 24-hour day. On this clock, the story of Megalania begins at the stroke of midnight. It evolves, and for the entire duration of this day, through the deep night, past the dawn, through the bright morning and the hot afternoon, and deep into the evening, it is the undisputed apex predator of its continent. It is a constant, powerful, and defining presence for 24 full hours. Now, where do we fit into this timeline? The first humans, the Aboriginal Australians who would witness the very end of this epic dynasty, arrive on the continent at around 11:30 p.m. They are present for only the last 30 minutes of Megalania's 24-hour day. Their entire rich 50,000-year history on the continent is just a sliver of time at the very end of the monster's reign. And what about all of recorded human history? Everything you have ever read in a history book, the rise and fall of every empire, every war, every invention from the wheel to the smartphone, all of it happens in the last 2 seconds before midnight strikes again. This journey through deep time is a profoundly humbling one. It forces us to see our own existence in its proper context. Our entire species, Homo sapiens, has only been around for about 300,000 years. Our civilization is a fragile and recent experiment. In the grand, sweeping library of life on Earth, our story is just one of the newest books on the shelf. From this perspective, we can see that the story of Megalania is not one of failure. Its extinction was a tragedy, yes, but its existence was an overwhelming and profound triumph. To persist as an apex predator, virtually unchanged, for 1.5 million years is an incredible feat of evolutionary success. It is a testament to a biological design so powerful, so efficient, and so perfectly adapted to its world that it endured through multiple ice ages, through dramatic shifts in climate, and through the rise and fall of countless other species. Megalania was not a fleeting anomaly or a bizarre evolutionary experiment gone wrong. It was a dynasty. It was one of the great, long-running success stories in the epic of life on this planet. And as we continue to reflect on its legacy, we must remember this. We are not just talking about some long-dead monster. We are talking about a creature that was, for a truly immense stretch of time, one of the most successful and dominant predators that the world has ever known. We have journeyed through Megalania's deep past and reflected on its long and successful reign. Now, for our final exploration, let's indulge in one last, fascinating act of imagination. Let us ask the great question of speculative biology. What if? What if, against all the odds, Megalania had weathered the perfect storm? What if some isolated populations had survived the climate shifts and the arrival of humans, clinging to existence and eventually adapting to the modern world? What would an Australia that shared its space with a living, breathing dragon look like today? First, we must rewind history to the arrival of the Europeans. Imagine Captain Cook's botanists, or the convicts of the First Fleet, stepping ashore into a world where the aboriginal stories of giant, monstrous lizards were not myths, but field reports. The early explorers and settlers, with their slow-loading muskets and complete ignorance of the continent's dangers, would have been utterly unprepared. The already difficult process of establishing a foothold on this strange new land would have become a terrifying ordeal. Expansion into the interior, the great taming of the bush, would have been a far slower, deadlier, and more contested affair. The Australian outback, already a place of legend, would have been a realm of true monsters, its reputation defined by a lethal, ever-present reptilian threat. Now, picture our modern world. The vast sheep and cattle stations that define so much of Australia's economy and identity would be nearly impossible to maintain in their current form. A 7-meter predator would not be deterred by a simple wire fence. It would not just take a single lamb. It would be capable of bringing down a full-grown bull or a horse. Livestock losses would be catastrophic. The only solution would be colossal, heavily fortified fencing, more akin to something from a dinosaur movie than a working farm, making agriculture prohibitively expensive in many regions. Our infrastructure would be fundamentally different. How would you build a highway, a railway, or a pipeline through established Megalania territory? The danger to construction crews would be extreme, requiring armed guards and armored vehicles. The sprawling suburbs that creep out from cities like Sydney, Brisbane, and Perth would have a hard, terrifying border. You can imagine a world where the pleasant, tree-lined streets end abruptly at a giant reinforced concrete wall, marking the beginning of Megalania country, a place where humans are not in charge. And what of our relationship with the wild? Imagine the national parks. Places like Kakadu or the Blue Mountains would not be destinations for family holidays and pleasant bushwalks. They would be zones of extreme danger, more like an Arctic polar bear habitat than a temperate forest. Accessible only to heavily armed rangers, specialist researchers, and perhaps a few thrill-seeking tourists on heavily armored safari buses. Your relaxing weekend camping trip would be replaced by a high-stakes expedition into a land where you are, without question, on the menu. The famous Australian tourism campaign would have a very different and much more intimidating tone. Finally, consider the conservation dilemma. How would we manage and protect a species that is a direct and lethal threat to human life and economic activity? It would be the single most challenging conservation issue on the entire planet. The political and social debates would be fierce. The conflict between protecting a unique, ancient species and ensuring human safety would be a constant, running sore. It would make the modern challenges of managing grizzly bears, tigers, or great white sharks seem simple by comparison. This imaginary world, so different from our own, is perhaps the best measure of Megalania's true significance. This thought experiment is not just a fantasy. It's a tool that reveals a profound truth. The absence of this single creature is the invisible foundation upon which much of modern Australia was built. By imagining a world where it survived, we can finally appreciate the colossal space it occupied, not just in the ancient ecosystem, but in the very destiny of a continent. Throughout this journey, we have used two names for this creature. One is its scientifically correct designation, Varanus priscus, the ancient monitor. It is a precise, descriptive, and proper label, the kind that allows scientists to place it neatly within the great family tree of life. But it is the other name, the original name bestowed by Sir Richard Owen upon seeing those first mysterious vertebrae, that truly endures in our minds. Megalania. There is a reason for this. A name is more than just a label. It is an incantation, and the name Megalania holds a unique and resonant power. Varanus priscus speaks to the logical, categorizing part of our brain. It is clinical and clean. But Megalania, the great roamer, speaks directly to our imagination. It feels less like a scientific term and more like a title, a name lifted from the pages of mythology. It evokes a sense of relentless, continent-spanning power, of a creature that didn't just inhabit a territory, but commanded it through tireless, ceaseless patrol. It is a name that feels worthy of the epic scale of the creature's story, tapping directly into that deep, primal part of us that is fascinated by monsters, by dragons, and by the sheer grandeur of the lost worlds of the deep past. And it is a fitting name, because Megalania has become more than just an extinct animal. It is now a powerful symbol with many layers of meaning. It is the ultimate icon of Pleistocene Australia, a tangible representation of a world of giants that now seems as fantastical as any fantasy realm. It is a direct and formidable rival to our ancestors, a genuine, non-human challenger that stood in the path of our species' inexorable expansion and forced us to prove our worth. And it is a cautionary tale written in the fossil record, a stark and silent warning about the devastating power of climate change and human impact working in deadly concert. This brings us back to the central premise of our entire journey tonight. We have called Megalania the most dangerous predator humans ever faced. But is that title truly deserved? After all, over the long course of our history, haven't lions, tigers, or bears killed more individual humans? Haven't microscopic predators like the malaria parasite claimed billions of lives? If we measure danger by body count alone, then perhaps not. But the danger of a predator is not just a simple matter of statistics. It is about the scale and nature of the challenge it presents to our survival and dominance. And in this, Megalania was unique. It was a form of danger our species had never been so thoroughly tested by before. The predators of Africa and Eurasia were familiar threats. We had co-evolved with them for millions of years. Megalania was alien. It was a monster from a different branch of life's tree, operating on a different set of rules. The sheer physical power imbalance between a human and this 7-meter reptile was arguably greater than with any other land predator our species has had to regularly contend with. And most importantly, it was the timing of the confrontation that made it so critical. Megalania challenged humanity at a uniquely vulnerable moment, just as we were making our first tentative steps onto a new and unknown continent, far from our evolutionary homeland. To survive and thrive here, we didn't just have to find food and water. We had to overcome the continent's established apex predator. It was the ultimate test in a new world, a reptilian gatekeeper standing at the dawn of humanity's journey in Australia. Overcoming that single colossal threat was a prerequisite for conquering the continent. And that is what makes it, arguably, the most dangerous predator our species ever truly faced. And so our long journey comes to its end. It began in the dusty, gaslit halls of a Victorian museum with a simple box of strange and oversized bones. From those first enigmatic clues, we have traveled back across 50,000 years and more through the mists of deep time to resurrect a lost world and paint a portrait of its undisputed reptilian king. We have felt the ground shake with the passage of giants, and we have peered into the shadows of the ancient bush, trying to imagine the primal fear of our distant ancestors. In the story of Megalania, all the great themes of life on Earth are woven together. We see the raw, terrifying power of nature in its most perfectly adapted form, a creature that was the product of 1,000,000 years of refinement as an engine of predation. We see the quiet, astonishing ingenuity of humanity, the frail primate that learned to conquer a world of monsters not with muscle, but with mind, community, and the controlled spark of a fire. We see the intricate, fragile web of life, where the removal of a single thread can cause the entire tapestry to unravel in ways we are only just beginning to understand. And we feel the profound and irreversible finality of extinction, the silent closing of a book that can never be opened again. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the great Roma, then, is not just a collection of fascinating facts about a giant lizard. Its true legacy is that of a mirror, one that reflects our own story back at us with humbling clarity. The tale of its downfall is inextricably linked with the story of our own rise. It is a powerful reminder that we were not always the masters of our environment, and that our mastery, once gained, came at a deep and lasting cost to the planet's magnificent biodiversity. The throne of the world's apex predator, once occupied by so many incredible and fearsome creatures, is now solely ours. And the story of Megalania is a heavy chapter in the history of how we came to claim it. The age of monsters is over. The great beasts are gone, their roars and hisses replaced by the quiet hum of the modern world. But the age of discovery is not. The story of the great Roma is, for now, as complete as we can make it. But beneath our feet, in the ancient layered rock of every continent, countless other stories lie sleeping, countless other lost worlds are waiting for a patient hand and a curious mind to wake them and to tell their tales. And now, as the echoes of this ancient world begin to fade, let the soft darkness gather around you. The great hunt is over. The titanic struggles have ceased. Imagine the primordial Australian landscape, no longer a place of danger, but a place of deep and profound peace. The sun has set, leaving streaks of violet and orange on a horizon uncluttered by modern lights. A vast canopy of stars, brighter than you have ever seen, wheels slowly overhead through the gentle, cool air. The moon casts a silver path across the still, dark water of a quiet billabong. The only sounds are the soft chirping of crickets, the distant, mournful call of a night bird, and the gentle rustle of leaves in a soft breeze that carries the scent of eucalyptus and cool earth. All of the creatures of that lost world, the great and the small, are settling into a deep and untroubled slumber. The great lizard sleeps now, not in a sun-drenched valley, but in the cool, quiet dark of the deep earth, its mighty bones at rest, cradled in stone. It is a titan finally at peace, its long reign over, its story told. And now, you too can let go of the day. Allow your thoughts to drift away like smoke on the night air. Feel the gentle pull of sleep, drawing you down into your own quiet, peaceful darkness. Let the immense silence of deep time be your comfort. Rest now, sleep now,